Good morning and welcome to a special edition of This Week, one-on-one with the Commander-in-Chief. At this defining moment of the Obama presidency,
this is not a world we should accept. This is what's at stake.
With a crisis overseas, new showdowns with Congress here at home, we go inside the White House, challenging a president trying to save his second term and stop a war. One-on-one with President Obama.
You've done it in the past.
No. George.
An ABC News exclusive. Plus live analysis from our Powerhouse Roundtable. It's all right here this Sunday morning.
From ABC News, a special This Week with George Stephanopoulos starts now.
It has been a perilous month for President Obama. After that chemical weapons massacre in Syria, he took America right to the brink of a military strike, then backed away, turning to Congress first and, surprisingly, the Russians, choosing diplomacy over war. And this weekend, a major new development. Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart have struck a deal for Syria to surrender its chemical weapons. If it works, and that's a big if right now, the president may be able to claim a measure of victory for an approach that's brought him a mountain of criticism. And on the eve of the deal, we went inside the White House to speak with the president. He was confident, convinced that America is in a better position now than when he was poised to order military action just 2 weeks ago.
We're definitely in a better position.
Why?
Keep in mind that my entire goal throughout this exercise is to make sure that what happened on August 21st does not happen again. That we do not see over 1,000 people, over 400 children subjected to poison gas, something that is a violation of international law and is a violation of
that won't happen
common
again?
decency. Well, I think we have the possibility of making sure that it doesn't happen again. Think about where we were. This event happens, and the initial response is the Syrians act as if they don't know anything about it. At that point, they're not even acknowledging that they've got chemical weapons. The Russians are protecting the Syrians, suggesting that there's no possibility that the Assad regime might have done this. And the inspectors weren't even in yet. And as a consequence of the pressure that we've applied over the last couple of weeks, we have Syria for the first time acknowledging that it has chemical weapons, agreeing to join the convention that prohibits the use of chemical weapons, and the Russians, their primary sponsor, saying that they will push Syria to get all of their chemical weapons out. The distance that we've traveled over these couple of weeks is remarkable. And my position and the United States position has been consistent throughout, which is that the underlying civil conflict in Syria is terrible. I believe that because of Assad's actions, his response to peaceful protests, we've created a civil war in Syria that has led to 100,000 people being killed and 6 million people being displaced. But what I've also said is that the United States can't get in the middle of somebody else's civil war. We're not going to put troops on the ground. We can't enforce militarily a settlement there.
But in the past, you said he had to go.
What we can do is make sure that the worst weapons, the indiscriminate weapons that don't distinguish between a soldier and an infant, are not used. And if we get that accomplished, then we may also have a foundation to begin what has to be an international process in which Assad's sponsors, primarily Iran and Russia, recognize that this is terrible for the Syrian people, and they are willing to come in a serious way to arrive at some sort of political settlement that would deal with the underlying terrible conflict that's taking place.
And President Putin has become your unlikely partner.
Yeah.
In this. And, you know, even in this op-ed, which has stirred up a lot of controversy here in the United States, he said there's every reason to believe that the rebels are the ones who use the chemical weapons. So does that tell you he's willing to lie to protect Assad?
Well, nobody around the world takes seriously the idea that the rebels were the perpetrators of this attack.
He wrote it in the New York Times.
Well, I understand. What I said is nobody around the world takes seriously the idea that the rebels perpetrated this attack. Now, what is true is that there are radical elements in the opposition, including folks who are affiliated with al-Qaeda, who, if they got their hands on chemical weapons, would have no compunction using them in Syria or outside of Syria. And part of the reason why we've been so concerned about this chemical weapons issue is because we don't want those folks getting chemical weapons any more than we want Assad to have chemical weapons. And so the best solution is for us to get them out of there. But with respect to Mr. Putin, I have said consistently that where the interests of the United States and Russia converge, we need to work together. And I talked to Mr. Putin a year ago, saying to him, the United States and Russia should work together to deal with these chemical weapons stockpiles and to work to try to bring about a political transition inside of Syria.
But do you trust he has the same goal? Do you really trust that?
I don't think that Mr. Putin has the same values that we do. And I think, obviously, by protecting Mr. Assad, he has a different attitude about the Assad regime. But what I've also said to him directly is that we both have an interest in preventing chaos. We both have an interest in preventing terrorism. The situation in Syria right now is untenable. As long as Mr. Assad's in power, there is going to be some sort of conflict there, and that we should work together to try to find a way in which the interests of all the parties inside of Syria, the Alawites, the Sunnis, the Christians, that everybody is represented, and that there is a way of bringing the temperature down so that the horrible things that are happening inside the country are continuing to happen. And I think there's a way for Mr. Putin, despite me and him having a whole lot of differences, to play an important role in that. And so I welcome him being involved. I welcome him saying, I will take responsibility for pushing my client, the Assad regime, to deal with these chemical weapons, because I think that if, in fact, not only Russia gets involved, but if potentially Iran gets involved as well in recognizing that what's happening there is a train wreck that hurts not just Syrians but destabilizes the entire region.
Aren't you worried at all that Putin is playing for time and playing you?
Well, Ronald Reagan said, "Trust but verify," and I think that that's always been the experience of U.S. presidents when we're interacting with first Soviet leaders and now Russian leaders. Mr. Putin and I have strong disagreements on a whole range of issues, but I can talk to him. We have worked together on important issues. The fact of the matter is that we couldn't be supplying all of our troops in Afghanistan if he weren't helping us in transporting those supplies through the northern borders of Afghanistan. So there are a whole range of areas where we currently work together. We've worked together on counterterrorism operations. And so, this is not the Cold War. This is not a contest between the United States and Russia. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if Russia wants to have some influence in Syria post-Assad, that doesn't hurt our interests. I know that sometimes this gets framed or looked at through the lens of the U.S. versus Russia. That's not what this is about. What this is about is how do we make sure that we don't have the worst weapons in the hands either of a murderous regime or, in the alternative, some elements of the opposition that are as opposed to the United States as they are to Assad.
This weekend, after intense talks, the U.S. and Russia hammered down a deal.
Providing this framework is fully implemented, it can end the threat these weapons pose not only to the Syrian people, but also to their neighbors, to the region.
It calls for Syria to admit international inspectors by November and to allow its chemical weapons to be destroyed starting next year. But President Assad has not yet endorsed the deal, and the rebels fighting his regime fear it will empower him.
If 1 year from now, Assad is in the process of surrendering his chemical weapons, but he's strengthened his hold on power, is that a victory?
Well, the chemical weapons issue is the issue I'm concerned about first and foremost, simply because that speaks directly to U.S. interests. It speaks to the potential that other countries start producing more chemical weapons, that the ban on chemical weapons unravels, and it becomes more accessible to terrorists, which in turn could be used against us. So I have a primary concern there. I also believe that the U.S. has an interest in seeing a stable Syria in which people aren't being slaughtered. And it is hard to envision how Mr. Assad regains any kind of legitimacy after he's gassed or his military has gassed innocent civilians and children. And so part of my argument here is that we will not intervene militarily to bring that transition about. But all the countries in the region, and I think the entire world and the United Nations, should have an interest in trying to bring about that stability.
What do you think Iran makes of all this? You mentioned Iran. Do you think they can look at all this and say, maybe all options aren't on the table, you're not willing to use force?
No, I think the Iranians, who we communicate with in indirect ways.
Have you reached out personally to the new president?
I have, and he's reached out to me. We haven't spoken directly, but
letters.
Yeah, and I think what the Iranians understand is that the nuclear issue is a far larger issue for us than the chemical weapons issue. That the threat against Israel that nuclear Iran poses is much closer to our core interests. That a nuclear arms race in the region is something that would be profoundly destabilizing. And so my suspicion is that the Iranians recognize they shouldn't draw a lesson that we haven't struck to think we won't strike Iran. On the other hand, what they should draw from this lesson is that there is the potential of resolving these issues diplomatically.
You think they're there? You think they believe that?
I think they recognize, in part because the extraordinary sanctions that we've placed on them, that the world community is united when it comes to wanting to prevent a nuclear arms race in the region. And negotiations with the Iranians is always difficult. I think this new president is not going to suddenly make it easy. But my view is that if you have both a credible threat of force combined with a rigorous diplomatic effort, that in fact you can strike a deal. And I hold out that hope.
Final foreign policy question. You've had a lot of armchair criticism. Yeah. I'm sure you're used to that.
I am.
Senator Corker, Foreign Relations Committee, said you're not comfortable as commander-in-chief. It's like watching a person who's caged. The president of the Council of Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, words like ad hoc, improvised, unsteady come to mind. This is probably the most undisciplined stretch of foreign policy in your presidency. Yeah. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that folks here in Washington like to grade on style, right? And so had we rolled out something that was very smooth and disciplined and linear, they would have graded it well even if it was a disastrous policy. We know that because that's exactly how they graded the Iraq war until
so this doesn't change your view of President Bush?
No, what it says is that I'm less concerned about style points. I'm much more concerned about getting the policy right. And what I've said consistently throughout is that the chemical weapons issue is a problem. I want that problem dealt with. And as a consequence of the steps that we've taken over the last 2 weeks to 3 weeks, we now have a situation in which Syria has acknowledged it has chemical weapons, has said it's willing to join the Convention on Chemical Weapons, and Russia, its primary sponsor, has said that it will pressure Syria to reach that agreement. That's my goal. And if that goal is achieved, then it sounds to me like we did something right.
And we have much more from President Obama, all the challenges here at home when we come back.